assistant. Then I got hired by the Times. I worked for the Times for 11 years, and I covered Trump for the Times. Then when he became president, I moved to the Washington Post, and I've been there ever since. And I guess advice.
Sure.
So my general advice, and I know this sounds like kids these days, but and you guys can disagree, but the one thing I've sort of noticed was when I was Maureen's research assistant, there was no lower job at the Times than being an assistant, right? And it would have never occurred to me to ever say no to anything she asked me to do, ever, right? It didn't even cross my mind. It was just me canceling plans to be free if she needed to work on a story on a Saturday. And one thing I am really struck by when I was at the Times and elsewhere is in terms of interns and assistants and people who pass through, there's just two types of people. And there's the ones who always say yes, no matter what it is. And, and then there's the ones who are ooh, I'd love to, but my college roommate's coming in and we're doing mimosas all day, right? So I can't, is there any chance I could do that story on Sunday? And when I look at the people at the Times and the Post who are the ones who get ahead and who the editors turn to, it's the people who just always say yes. And the example I give, and this is imperfect because it didn't actually work out this way, but oftentimes if you're an intern or someone's turning around and asking you to do something, the truth is it's a shit assignment, right? You are doing it because one of the other 6 people on the team who is actually supposed to be doing it didn't want to do it. So for instance, sometimes we'll ask if it's a random thing and all the White House reporters are busy and Trump is just going to Bedminster for the weekend. It basically means you just sit in suburban New Jersey and have very little access to the president. Sometimes we'll ask an intern or one of our fellows to go. And in theory, it seems like a bad assignment, right? The highlight of your weekend is going to be eating at Cheesecake Factory across the street. But you have no idea if this is the time in Bedminster or Mar-a-Lago where Trump consults on the patio with a foreign leader before launching missile strikes in Syria, as has happened, and you're the reporter there who gets that front page story. Or the same thing I always think of when George W. Bush, when 9/11 happened, he had flown down on what was a really routine trip that you could see any White House reporter passing on. He was going to read a book to a bunch of kindergartners, right? And so that's a world in which they might be hey, can you sub in, can you fill in? And so I just feel always saying yes just puts you in a position for more opportunities, and the editors always turn to you. If you're the sort of person who there's also, again, when I covered Congress, we would have people up there helping, and then I'll be done. But you would ask someone, I need this quote from McCain. Can you get it for me? And there was the person you knew who would come back and be sorry it took me a while, I was waiting for McCain and he didn't show up, so then I figured out where the hearing he was chairing was, and I waited outside of the hearing room, and then he left out of a door I wasn't expecting, and I chased him down the hall, and I got the quote and I transcribed it for you, and here it is. And then there's the person who would come back and be I couldn't get McCain, but I got Senator Schumer, and here's the audio, transcribe it yourself, right? So who is the person who you're gonna go to and elevate? So I mean, I guess my gist is be a hard worker and say yes. That's very obvious, but it is stunning how few people follow that advice.
When you were lower down the food chain, what's the worst thing anybody ever asked you to do?
Oh my God.
Or you can pick from them if you like, but
just one example. So many things, but one thing was when I worked at the Times in the DC bureau, there was a party. I forget what it was. People were getting bought out and leaving. So a party, and the female news clerks, not the male news clerks, but the female news clerks were asked to go around passing drinks. And at the time, I sort of wasn't as woke, and but now I find that wildly sexist. Whereas at the time, I just thought it was vaguely offensive. But that's one example.
But you did it?
Yeah, of course.
And you didn't get any scoops from it then?
No.
So the other thing that I wanted Ashley to talk about, and this is an issue that we have talked about among the people who started the prize, but we're just reaching the point where the students who've won the Nora Prize are having kids. And so one of the things that we were always taught when we were undergrads is that you can't have a normal life in journalism in any way, shape, or form. So Ashley is the second Nora Prize winner to have a kid. The first one, Melody Joy Kramer, is not a full-time. She's not working as a full-time journalist. But when I posted online that Ashley was the first pregnant Nora Prize winner, Melody gave it to me in a big way. So Melody does have 2 kids. But Ashley is the first of the Nora Prize winners to have a baby on her beat, go back to work, go through all that. So I'm wondering what that has been like for you. And what you thought it was going to be like before it happened, and how it's been.
So I have an 8-year-old stepdaughter, and I have a 10-month-old daughter. And I have my daughter, 10-month-old, covering the White House. I don't know. I should say I'm very lucky that the Post is a place that, I got 4 months of paid leave. So this comes with all the caveats that, I have all the support you could want. I had a place that actually gave paid parental leave. My husband works for the Wall Street Journal, which gives 5 months of paid leave. And we both basically took, I know it's insane and amazing. Yeah. And we both basically took most of our leave. I'm married. I have a partner. I'm not doing it alone. I have a partner who does most of the things, right? Who actually cooks and cleans and does bedtimes and pickups and all of that. And it's still really hard. It's still just impossibly hard. The thing that I've found, and I don't know, and it's actually kind of interesting, there's a bunch of women, more in TV than in print, but journalists kind of my cohort who have all had kids. And I've been kind of struck by how much people are very much openly on social media and whatever platforms, talking about the challenges of being on a foreign trip with the president and having to pump breast milk between live shots and then ship it home on freeze-dried ice, right? That's actually not something I was doing because I just stopped when I went back to work, but more power to those people who are able to keep it up. And so it's been kind of nice to see women talking about those challenges and it not being something to be embarrassed about or awkward about, or a female on-air person trying to ask a camera guy to bring the breast milk back on Air Force One because it's easier than having to bring it through TSA, which are all things you guys probably aren't thinking about now. But
it's never too soon to worry.
But the one way I've sort of dealt with it, and I think it's easier because I just look at women around me and they're all sort of being upfront about it, is I don't know, maybe I should, but I just don't feel particularly guilty asking for what I need. Our daughter's in a nanny share. The nanny leaves at 6 every day, so that means every other week I have to leave at 5:30 to get home, which is a crazy thing to do when you're a journalist. But I'm just always very clear with my editors of I have a pediatrician's appointment, so I will be in at this time. If you need me to do this sort of story, that's fine, but I need to leave at 5:30 today, so maybe you team me up with a partner, or can this hold, and can I have some extra time? And so far, that's worked out pretty well for me. The caveats would be the one day I had to leave to get home for the nanny, and I was this is brilliant. I will run out the door, but I was still writing. I was so I'll take a cab home so I can keep writing in the cab and keep on filing and buy myself that extra time. And as I was literally running out, because it's tight, running out the door of the Post, I tripped, skinned both of my elbows, both of my knees, but didn't have any time. So it's now I get in the cab and I'm just bleeding everywhere and filing. So I'm not trying to say this is perfect. And then and then the other caveat I would add is so is that and people say this is a phase, but I will say my 10-month-old, she prefers her father, her older sister, all dogs in the neighborhood, and our nanny to me, right? And so I come home and she just screeches when I take her away from her love, the nanny. So again, I'm not saying everything is going perfectly or that I've figured out this balance, but it is nominally doable.
I'm curious, are the non-mom female reporters supportive, and are the male reporters who are in your age bracket who have kids similarly involved with their I know I'm just bringing up stereotypes of what it's like, and I don't have kids, so I don't know, but I know what younger female reporters are afraid of when this is going to happen. So I guess I'm trying to ask a question that would predict what I think would happen, even if it doesn't.
Yeah, I would say everyone, again, and this is just at the Post, and I'm incredibly lucky, so it could be different at different places, and I'm not saying it's perfect, but it feels like everyone has been really supportive, and maybe I'm being, I also think that I think I'm doing the exact same caliber stories as I did before I had a kid. And so I think so maybe my hours have shifted, right? Maybe I now file bloody in an Uber, whereas before I would have sat at my desk, fully fleshed. But I think as long as I'm sort of producing the same types of stories and making myself available, and, I'm on a 6-person White House team. We have a shift. I sometimes have to trade shifts, right? I have something with my kid, can you trade? But I'm never asking someone to cover me or not pulling my weight. And so I found as long as you're producing and pulling your weight and being a good colleague and being a good teammate, people are more than happy to help. And again, for me, it's a kid, right? I have a kid, but everyone has personal stuff and family shit. So my teammates, it might be a sick parent or a sick partner or an unexpected vacation opportunity. So you're always kind of trying to cover each other. And so So I think just like being a good human, and in my case, again, it's kids, and other people it might be like a pet or something. It's just kind of rewarded and respected, at least if you work at a good place, which I do.
So, but you're pretty public, and you've tweeted about your pregnancy and being a mom and everything, and
yes,
you're out there. And of course,
I got invited to be on a podcast about postpartum depression on the strength of my tweets.
Did you do it?
I did, but it hasn't aired yet.
Were you pro or con postpartum depression?
Well, I was like, I'm happy to be on your podcast, but I don't think I had postpartum depression. I was like, sure. Like, did I cry all the time and was I miserable? Absolutely. But so I guess I was.
But don't judge me and say it's depression.
I was pro.
The other thing I was going to ask you about that you've spoken about here before, I do think there's been a sea change in the way that people work in teams. Meaning, I'm not sure how many people who work for the DP work in teams. I feel like a lot of times as undergrads, nonfiction writing is a pretty isolated biz. But I do get the feeling that teams are more the active way that most journalism is done these days. You didn't come up that way. You were more of an individual writer at the Times.
Yeah.
But you're really actively part of a team at the Post. And I'm wondering how you learn the skills to be a team writer rather than an individual writer.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a couple-fold, and it feels like it's changing at the Times too. But
especially for breaking news.
For breaking news, and for major stories. But I actually have been very lucky, both when I was at the Times, when I covered Romney, my writing partner was basically Michael Barbaro. You may now know him from The Daily. And now I work very closely with Phil Rucker and people at the Post. But two things. One is I've been very lucky to have, so two bylines can mean any number of things, right? It can mean like you're on the ground in Puerto Rico and you're getting horrible cell phone service and you're feeding the quotes or the scenes to someone who is back in the newsroom writing it up. Or it can also mean, and this is often how it works out for me, if you have a good writing partner, like you're sitting in a room with someone in a Google Doc, right? Like going back and forth. And so if people were like, well, who wrote the lead or who wrote that story? I'd be like, well, I wrote this first part, then like Phil deleted half of it and like wrote the second clause. Then we like argued over a word. And like, so I've been very lucky to have a really collaborative relationship. But for the White House especially, under Trump, there's just so much news. Everyone's team has like doubled in size. The Times now has 6. The Post has 6. And especially early on, like the sorts of things you were asked to produce, which is kind of the same with breaking news. You had to, you get an assignment, like Trump would fire someone by tweet at 1. You would need to turn a story around that explained not just what happened, but what was the process, how did it go down? And in order to do it, you literally would have like 4 hours to call 26 people and write the story. And the only way you could do that is if you literally have like 3 people making nonstop calls, especially because a lot of people in the Trump White House or the Trump orbit like lied. So there was no one person you could talk to and just take it to the bank. Like you would hear something from someone, but you'd have to check it 4 other ways to kind of get a kaleidoscope of what actually happened. And so in order to do that, you need all those people making those calls, and then one person maybe starts to write while other people keep on calling. And so it's just felt very natural. And I personally prefer to work in teams. I just think it's like more fun, but
it's interesting because of course in magazines, like a magazine writer would sooner jump out a window than have 2 people write a story. I mean, it's hard enough to have the editor tell you to change stuff, right? You remember when you were a full-time writer, right?
Yeah.
It's not normal.
It's not normal in terms of like a reported trend or by like a trend or investigation piece, but most of our service packages or stories that have multiple components, like those have multiple bylines on them all the time.
Well, since you started talking, why don't you go next?
Sure.
Go ahead.
I graduated from Penn in 2012. When I was at Penn, I was the editor-in-chief of 34th Street. And after school, I went to Columbia's Graduate School of Journalism. And then after that, I worked at HuffPost for a couple years as an entertainment editor, and then moved to Entertainment Weekly to be a digital news editor, mostly covering books and music. And then I've been at Cosmo for about 2.5 years. I started as a senior editor on the print magazine, just editing and pitching and writing stories for our lifestyle section, working on some features. And in the past year, we merged our print and digital components. So we're kind of one big, massive team doing lots and lots of stuff. So now I edit stories for the website and also for the magazine.
Why does the editor of 34th Street need to go to journalism school?
No.
It's a question that a lot of people are probably wondering about, and they should. So it's a good. So tell us.
No, I decided to go to J school I decided to apply to J school because I didn't feel like my career at 34th Street gave me the reporting cred I felt like I needed to be a quote unquote like real journalist. I wanted to get like the boots on the ground reporting skills that I feel like people got at the DP but didn't get at Street. I have no idea what the reporting kind of curriculum is like at Street these days, but when I was at Penn as an undergrad, there was no journalism minor, so I was a creative writing minor or major. I took as many non-writing fiction classes as I could, but a lot of those weren't necessarily like
It's
journalism.
non-fiction writing, not non-writing fiction.
Is that what I said?
Although non-writing fiction class would be a good idea for a course.
A non-fiction writing class. Yeah, I just felt like I needed a little more reporting experience, which I did feel like I got at Columbia.
So Jess was the first person who applied for the Nora Prize, who we gave the prize to, knowing she was going to go to journalism school. Because when we were undergrads, the idea was that you shouldn't have to go to journalism school. You should get all the experience you need as an undergrad. And if you need to go to journalism school, you should have worked at the DP longer. And so we really had to wring our hands over this because we realized we were wrong. I mean, one of the things about mentorship is that you actually have to roll with it and realize you're wrong. Ashley will tell you how many times I told her things that were wrong, if she cares to. But because again, your idea of mentorship comes from your own career and your own experience, and all you can do is try to listen to people. So one of the things that was challenging for us last year, we gave the Nora Prize for the first time to a non-American born student who will have her challenges because she's not a U.S. citizen. If you had ever told us 15 years ago that we would do that, we probably would say, well, no, that's not possible. Maybe we think you can't have that career in journalism. Now we're going to make sure that Rebecca has that career and do everything that we can to help her. So I think that times change, and it's important for mentoring for times to change too. And so now we've had other people who went to journalism school, and you also worked at Weeklies, and then and HuffPost and Entertainment Weekly were pretty fast turnaround, and now you're at a monthly. But the web page is quick, very fast turnaround.
Yeah, in my digital career at HuffPost and EW, and I think this is true of like most kind of quote unquote like bloggy places, it's just like a constant churn. Like there were days where I would be writing 10 stories a day, 12 stories a day. They weren't good, but they were there. And at a lot of places, that's what counts. Like a lot of places still have traffic quotas and byline quotas. And I don't think that that's like necessarily the best way to get the best kind of content out of your writers. And I think a lot more places are figuring that out. But yeah, even at Cosmo where I work now, like half of my time is usually split working on the magazine and half of it is working on the website, which is usually editing like longer trend pieces. And we're pretty lucky where we aren't necessarily like indebted to that crazy churn. We have a team that does like all the celebrity news, and that is like totally nuts. But most of the editors and writers on staff are working it with a little longer lead time, which is really nice.
So what advice would you give for undergrads who are in the Street DP system, and what advice would you give for undergrads who aren't, in terms of if they're interested in what you do?
I think if you're in the Street DP system, like the best thing that I got out of it was meeting so many older students who I could see like go on and have these wonderful careers. I remember when I was, I think, a sophomore, the senior editor-in-chief, her name was Julia Rubin, and I looked up to her so much. I thought she was so awesome as a Street editor. And then she was kind of like the first person that I really knew as like a human who I was friendly with, who went on to actually have a job in journalism and like go be a journalist. And I was like, oh, maybe that's like a real thing I can do too. And I just didn't know any writers growing up. And so, after her, there were so many other people like within the Street DP community who I could see them flourish and be like, oh, that person has a job there, that person has a job there. And it just became like this reality for me. And so staying in touch with them was like such a great thing. I could call them, on winter breaks and be like, what internship should I apply for? Could you put in a good word here? Like what should I do? And that was before I won the Nora Prize and before I had other mentors. But for those who aren't in the Street DP community, I would just say, like, go do that. Like, if you're interested in nonfiction writing, like what Steven said, like, it's just the best place to get experience because you can make a ton of mistakes and, like, nothing really is going to happen to you. Like, you're not going to get in trouble. You
should also, in that world, I mean, you can write for publication as an undergrad. Mm-hmm. That was not, when I was an undergrad, that was really not true. I mean, once Nora told me to send a piece to the New Yorker, the rejection letter kept me going for the next 10 years. But it was a humor piece. It wasn't a reported piece, and no 18-year-old's going to do a reported piece for the New Yorker. Now, I think 18-year-olds do reported pieces for the New Yorker all the time. And because in reality, at most publications, people expect younger people to tell them what the younger people are doing because they don't know themselves. I know when I wrote about the fashion industry, I was actually appalled at all these famous people who were making all the decisions for people's fashion, who knew nothing about fashion. All they knew was to ask which kid what they were seeing at which club. So you have access to something that editors really want, which is the perspective of your generation. Ironically, most younger people don't want to write about their own generation because they don't want to be seen as young. So it's just like whenever lawyers come to J school, they don't want to write about law. So it's a built-in thing. But what I would say is the experience of finishing a story, trying to get it published, getting it published, is not something you have to wait until you're done with school with.
I just think that the biggest thing that's been helpful to me in my career is finding people that I really do admire and respect in every job that I've been in, and kind of like latching onto them and making sure that I can learn as much from them as possible. That is the whole idea of mentoring, and I think people talk about that a lot as this kind of like nebulous, like weird thing that feels also like networking, which could also feel kind of gross in some ways. But it is like so important to surround yourself with people who you respect and admire and think do really, really cool work. So, you know, in every job I've had, I've always tried to seek out the smartest person in the room and just be like, hey, can I work with you on projects? You know, do you need help with this? Like, what can I do for you? And that's always benefited me.
Okay. Luis?
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, could you?
One thing you said was that one way to gain experience is by working at the DP longer, but you don't, when you're at Penn, when you're in college, you don't always realize instantaneously that you want to go into journalism, and that's kind of what happened to me. I didn't start working for the DP till my summer after sophomore year. I would have loved to start working at it since freshman year, but I just didn't know that journalism was something I was interested in. So I joined it while I was taking summer classes here at Penn. On a whim, I saw like a flyer that VP joined the summer Pennsylvanian, which I think nobody reads, but it was amazing and I loved it. And the first story I wrote was about, I think, something like how food trucks on campus stay in business during summer.
You know what? I wrote that same story in 1978.
No way.
for summer 34th Street. Holy crap. Okay.
Well, there you go.
If you think you made up a new idea for a story, you can quickly forget that.
I felt so clever.
And Ben Franklin wrote that story.
No, and I loved it. And I started dedicating more time that summer to the summer Pennsylvania and the DP than the actual classes I was here to take. And so when I came back my junior year, I continued to write for the DP during the semester. That junior summer, because I had gotten into journalism relatively late, which it shouldn't be late to get into journalism your sophomore year, but that's how the industry works nowadays with internships and fellowships. So when I applied to like internships at newsrooms my junior year, I didn't get accepted until a single one. But I kept going, and then I did get accepted to work part-time my senior year at the Philadelphia Inquirer, which was probably the best decision I made while at Penn, was not just working for the DP, but also looking beyond, as you were saying, writing for other publications, and, you know, waking up 2 days a week and going to an actual like newsroom and working from there, and like getting to know Philadelphia and seeing it from a different angle, and then coming back to campus and like just fitting in back as a student after like having worked as like a real journalist for a day was like amazing for me. I loved it. And during my first semester senior year, I applied to all the different newspapers again, and this time because I had the Inquirer, I had worked a couple months at the Inquirer. I guess they like gave me another look. And ended up with a summer internship at the Times, and I'm still there. And so, yeah.
So Luis is the second person to go to the Times on the summer fellowship and then basically dare them to fire you. So Matt Flegenheimer, who has been here before, did the same thing. There's been a very good track record of this. I will point out the Inquirer fellowships have not only been for DP people. So I know people who've been in the nonfiction writing program and in the journalism minor who never set foot in the DP, who did fine at the Inquirer. and we're able to get clips there. Rebecca Highwile, who was the fact checker on my last book, was not very active at the DP, but she worked there as a fellow. And the other thing that's nice about the Inquirer is if they like you there, they'll take you back for a second internship. So a number of people will have a summer experience, then go back in the fall and can do that. The one thing that Luis points out also, I would say, like, you know, the deadline period for all the things you have to apply for, it started while we were sitting here. So I think that people are kind of afraid to look at the deadlines, just like when they first apply to college. But there are an enormous number of things that you might want to apply for, and there's no rhyme or reason for when the deadlines are. So it really is a good idea to go home, look at any publication that you like, and ask, is there a fellowship entry point? Is there a summer internship? And when is the deadline for it? Because it could be in November. It could be in December. None of them are in October, I don't think, but maybe a couple.
A lot of the deadlines are now. This semester, your first semester, senior year of your seniors, or even if you're a junior, I think, and want to do a summer before senior year. But Poynter, if you go online and you search Poynter, Poynter, and put something like Poynter summer internships or summer newsroom internships, they have a running list which they update every year with like more than 100 media internships, not just newspapers, but like radio, TV, online publications, magazines.
Poynter is a nonprofit that has online courses and is a great resource. Keep in mind, the people at career placement at Penn are lovely people. There aren't enough people who leave Penn to be journalists for them to have expertise in what you're doing. So go to them, talk to them, because you're supposed to do that. But I think what you're hearing here is that it's important to look to the world of people who look to mentorship, look to resources beyond Penn to find out even what the things are that you're supposed to be applying for. I remember the first time somebody, when Melody Kramer wanted to apply for the Kroc Fellowship, which we had never heard of, because none of us had been in radio. So the Kroc Fellowship is this amazing fellowship at NPR where you work there for a year. They move you around to different places. She worked at Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. She was at several public radio stations. And here we were the mentors, and we had never heard of it. And she said, I think I'd be really good at this. And she got it. And that really launched her career. So it's an imperfect system, but what I would say is it's all about reporting. I mean, your career and getting the information about your career is as much about reporting as the work in nonfiction writing is. And so there's not like a piece of paper someone's going to give you that has a perfect list of the things you're supposed to look at, because it's also what you are interested in.
And reach out. Use the if you go on the Quaker Net, I think it's called. It's like I don't know if it's still called that, but I used to go on that. You can see like the whole alumni network that Penn has, and you can search by their employers. So like I would search like Miami Herald, or I think I did it through there, but now I would find like the contact info of reporters that currently work at the Miami Herald who went to Penn, and then I would just straight up email them, introduce myself, ask them for like 5 minutes, like give them a very minimal time commitment, and to like get on the phone or grab coffee if they're in Philly, and then you get on the phone with them and you might talk to them for much longer than that probably, and that's a good way in when you're applying to these places. You can tell them, hey, as a heads up, I just submitted my application. If you want to like pass it along, that's something I did as well. And find mentors. I think we had Rob Strauss as our mentor. He's a journalist who lives in Philly, and he mentors students, or used to mentor Penn students, one or two every year, and he helped me with all my applications and reading over my essays that I was submitting to newsrooms.
And one brief thing also that made me think of this is, and this was, I don't know, I think this is stereotypically a female problem, but anyone can have it. Like, don't be afraid to be a pest to follow up, because if you email someone, whether it's just for sort of like an informational phone call, or you've submitted an application to someone to whatever, be their assistant, or you're looking to hire for something, everyone's busy, and they may sort of like start or be like, oh, I want to read this resume or respond, and then just forget about it. And my inclination is just like, it felt so cringy to like, I've emailed them, I haven't heard back, I'm going to email them again. I just always felt like I was a pain, but I would force myself to do it. And in a rare way, like that really annoying behavior is what will make you a good journalist. And so whoever you are bothering and pestering will ultimately have begrudging respect for you, because they're like, if they've emailed me 97 times about this internship, right? Like, how many times are they going to go knock on the door of that juror we're trying to get in touch with? Or how many times are they going to call the county clerk? And one of the main reasons I got the job with Maureen Dowd, I would like to say, was because I was the best qualified, but no way, right? I mean, it's just so hard to get your name pulled out of the application pile, but her assistant had gotten hired by the Times. She's still at the Times and was moving on. I had emailed, and their process, they just sort of like were trying to figure it out. And so over the course of like 2.5 months, every single week, I found an excuse to email this poor girl just to check in with her and to touch base. And she literally said to me, she was like, honestly, she's like, one of the reasons we brought you in was because like when Maureen was finally ready to make a decision, I like looked around and like you were like in the top of my inbox and you were in the middle of my inbox, right? And like you
You're outside the building.
Yeah, I was lurking in the lobby. And, like,
No, well, actually, that's interesting.
And that's what it was.
Showing up is you can't do.
Yeah.
Right.
No.
If you show up and they don't know you, that's like stalking.
Yeah.
But if you're emailing and you know, one of the things you also do is like you tweet around, you know, you like link in and so that they know you're looking at them every place, and you know, try to be respectful in terms of the number of times you email. But the other thing is like if somebody doesn't get back to you, you should want to know why they didn't. I mean, the number of students that I've had as undergrads looking for jobs, and actually journalism students, who say, well, I emailed them and they didn't email me back. Or I emailed them twice and they didn't email me back. I mean, if that's your standard for not getting attention paid to you, then you really, actually, you can't do any job. I mean, I don't want to pretend, no, because I don't want to pretend that's a journalism issue. That's
Don't even work.
It's a problem of the universe. I mean, you have to have enough belief in yourself that you matter enough to say, like, hey, it does feel sometimes like you're asking somebody to just come out and break up with you. You know, it's like the person who's avoiding you and like, just tell me we're breaking up, you know. But at the same time, you would be amazed at the number of times the person literally hasn't seen the 10 emails you sent. I found out like early on in my relationship with my editor at Random House that all my emails were going in her spam. So I just thought she was avoiding me. She didn't like me anymore. She didn't like my book anymore. So there are spam filter issues as well. The other thing that I would say, and I want both of you to talk about this because you both had these experiences in different ways. You come into an organization and they ask you to do a certain thing. You're there to do that thing really great. But at the same time, I think that in the world of media, what we are looking for are people who are going to think outside even the box that we have given you. And I mean, Luis had an experience where he was not covering the hurricanes, but because he was from Puerto Rico, he was able to go there and have an amazing immersion experience. And you'll think this is silly, Ashley, but I actually thought that the piece you did for the Times Magazine very early on that was sort of inspired by your sister was a perfect example of the kind of things that most people who were there to write about a certain thing would be too scared to pitch something that's personal, that's outside of what they're supposed to do. But I think it really probably showed people at the Times that you could do a lot of things. So I'd love both of you to talk about those experiences if you could, or other ones that are like it if you can think of others.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it goes back to what Ashley was saying about always saying yes. And always saying yes, but also trying to go beyond and try to make your own luck and try to open new doors and like go in. In my case, after my 3 months were up, then during those 3 months I was reporting on the Metro desk at the Times, and they would send me out to like, you know, shootings and crime scenes, and you were like on the street and you would send feeds, what we call feeds. It's like, you know, reported out small snippets of what you're seeing and interviews back to a reporter who would be like typing it in the newsroom. And then once you show you can do that and you're always available, and they'll, you know, they call you on a Sunday because it's something, and you know, you say yes, they'll start, you know, to once you show you can do the bread and butter, they start getting more confidence and giving you more opportunities. And then slowly, you know, I started to write my own pieces and did some enterprise pieces during the summer. But then, so the internship ended, and they extended me for another 6 months on Metro. And it was during that extension that Hurricane Irma hit Puerto Rico, which is where I'm from, and I realized that they didn't have anyone to cover the aftermath of the hurricane in Puerto Rico because Irma was going to Florida, and so they flew over the reporter to Florida for landfall there. And so that reporter who I had been helping and were informing her reporting while she was in Puerto Rico, she said, you know what, you should maybe ask them to send you to Puerto Rico. And so I emailed like the national editor from the Times, who I didn't know, and I said, like, straight up, I said, look, my name is Luis, I'm an intern, I'm from Puerto Rico. I told them the flights to Puerto Rico are $128. You don't need to pay for a hotel because my parents live there, I have a car there, so like for $128 I can write you like 2 or 3 pieces. And like I straight up gave him some ideas, and he emailed me back like, get on a plane as soon as you can. And I was really hungover that day too. Because I was this close. I remember I was so hungover, I was this close to like not email. And that's where I realized you always gotta like make that extra effort. Like trust me, it works out. And so I was there, and I was there for a week reporting. I went to, found a way to get a helicopter to go to St. Thomas, and we were the first like U.S. news outlet in St. Thomas. I had like 6 hours to like take in everything, like found a fixer, and like he drove me around, and then I had to like file from the back of like a pickup truck with like no internet, and I didn't even know how I filed the story. I remember I started
Styrofoam cup.
no, like I had one bar of signal, and I started like literally just telling them my story, the editors up in New York, because I couldn't send them via email. And then I saw I got like an extra bar of signal on my hotspot, and so I hung up on him. Like it was like 4 p.m. and like just praying that by hanging up on him, like the story would go through because it was using less signal. And they kept calling me. I was just like ending the call. I could see the email like sending itself, like leaving the inbox, and like it went through. Anyways, I thought it was awesome, and then like the experience of that experience, I mean, it was horrible. It was a hurricane that affected millions of people, but it was an incredible experience reporting wise. And while I was there, Hurricane Maria was it's a mess. Hurricane Maria like started coming to Puerto Rico, and I was the only person the Times had there, an intern, and so I was the one who covered the hurricane for the next couple of days until they could bring backup. And that's a moment where I've had a lot of pressure, but I also saw how great it is to work with a team. I had a whole team of editors and reporters back in New York helping me, and so I didn't feel alone, although I felt like an intense amount of pressure, obviously. And I was there for, like, long story short, I was there for another month reporting the aftermath. And when I came back, they offered me to stay on Metro, which is more boring than what I was doing. But it all came from sending that email, really hungover email. And if I wouldn't have sent that,
send more hungover emails to people. That's the takeaway.
So yeah, I mean, a lot of this is persistence, a lot of it is luck, and a lot of it is making your own luck. And so put yourself out there, be persistent. Send emails.
Ashley, tell a little bit. I mean, you did a couple of sort of out of the box stories when you were first starting at the Times.
Yeah,
the magazine.
So actually, the one piece he's mentioning, it ran William Safire. He's now dead, but he used to have a column in the Times Sunday magazine called On Language, and it was like a very highbrow distillation of like words and language. And it was a piece I wrote in Professor Strauss's class, actually, for the class about. I had a younger sister who, like, basically abbreviated everything, so she and her friends just sounded like really dumb Valley girls. And I had written it in his class, and when I worked for Maureen, I showed it to her, and Maureen was like, "Oh, this is great. This should run in On Language." And I was like, "There's no way that will have to run in On Language, right?" And she literally was like, "Oh, when Safire goes on vacation, they sometimes have guest columnists. Let me just get you his assistant's info and send it to him." And I sent it to him, and he edited it down a little bit, and it ran. So that's a sense of like what you're doing at Penn, even if it's not in the DP or 34th Street, can be publishable.
Absolutely.
Or can be pitched. And then just generally, I mean, I don't know. I never had I cover politics now. I've covered politics for a decade, but I always thought I'd be a magazine reporter. I never had a conception of myself as like a very serious, hard news reporter. And so for me, it was very easy. I guess what I put is I don't have any concerns about being frivolous, right? Like, I'm going to write about stuff that's like fun and voicey and interests me and hope that it interests readers as well. And those are still some of my favorite stories to write, even on the White House beat. And especially when I was at the Times and I was a young reporter or a young assistant trying to get stories, I realized very quickly, and this gets back to something one of you two said, but that even if I worked for Maureen during the 2008 election, but like even if I had a brilliant idea about Obama or Hillary and I pitched it, they'd be like, okay, that's great, kid, but like go tell it to the Obama reporter, go tell it to the Hillary reporter. But like my value added was that like I was young, and especially at the times then, there were just like no young people. Now it feels like there's like a ton of young people and they sort of have some kind of beat on the culture, but then they really didn't. So I could be like, oh, everyone in DC is playing kickball, right? Like young adults are playing kickball and dodgeball. And keep in mind, this was like 2006. This was kind of new and interesting. And like, you know, let's do a story about this. And I could pitch it, and like that was my value add. And like I might not know about Hillary Clinton's foreign policy, but like I knew where Bush's twins were going and getting drunk at Adams Morgan, and I could do a feature on that bar. And so I sort of just like took my life and my understanding and like pitched it, and I wasn't like embarrassed about it or ashamed, because like that was my only way in, and like that was my value add. I wasn't going to tell you anything amazing about Libya, but I could tell you what it was like to be a young Republican blacking out in Georgetown.
Was that you?
Let's take some questions. Who has questions? You're kidding. Yes, if you don't have one, make one up. Go ahead.
You talked about, Ashley, about freelancing at the New York Times before you were hired. You talked about freelancing at the New York Times before you were fully hired there. How did you get into freelancing from the beginning?
Sure. So it's a little more nuanced than that, and that I was Maureen Dowd's research assistant, so I was fully hired. The Times paid me a salary, and I got health benefits, but I wasn't a reporter in any way. So I had one tiny leg up, which was that like when I was emailing, it was coming from a New York Times email address, and I had the credibility of saying I work in the DC bureau, I'm Maureen Dowd's assistant. So like it put me, I think, psychologically like a step above just a random person off the street. In the same way, when you made your pitch, presumably the fact that you were an intern, you got a Times email address, you've been doing quality stories for Metro, gave them the confidence than someone out of college, right? Just being like, I found cheap flights and I'm hungover, send me, right? So I did have that leg up. But I mean, a lot of it was like, I just pitched and pitched and pitched, and it was really, and sometimes it was really frustrating, and sometimes I remember I would like pitch ideas and they would say no to me, and then I would like open up the style section a couple weeks later, and that like exact story had run by someone else, and I would be like devastated, almost in tears. And Maureen was like, my instinct is to call up the editor and yell at them, but like that's not going to help either of us, right? Like, and she was just.
Do you think they stole your story idea, or do you think that other people just had the same idea and saw the same thing?
No, I think they stole it.
People do that all the time.
I 100% think they stole it. And I sort of understand why, right? Because like they're like, oh, this is a good idea, and we could give it to this kid who like might or might not be able to deliver, and like might or might not be up to our standards, and like might or might not turn it in on deadline, or we could give it to our really talented reporter who we paid to do just this. Like, I mean, I wouldn't make the same decision because I think it's like super shitty and fucked up, but I totally understand why they did it, right? And so, you know, Maureen was, so in that case, I guess my point is like, and sometimes I would get lucky, and all you needed was like that one piece, because once you had that one clip, then that gave them a little more faith to trust you. But just because I pitched something to the Times and got rejected, like I literally would have like a list of publications. Okay, the Times doesn't want it, fine. Like, does GQ want it? Does Esquire want it? Does Washingtonian want it? Does Chicago Magazine want it? And then there were some places, like at the time, Huffington Post, since they weren't paying you, would publish a lot of stuff for free, right? Because there was no downside. So I'd pitch it to the Huffington Post, so I'd at least get a clip. One time, and this story's kind of convoluted, but one time there was something that like I thought the Times had promised me I could do, and then they said I couldn't anymore, and I was so pissed. I tried to pitch it to the Post, and the editor at the Post was like, in my 17 years of editing culture here, I have never had a Times employee pitch me a story. I think it is for both of our benefit that we just stand down. Oh my God. And like, he probably wasn't wrong, but my point was like, I would just pitch and pitch and pitch and pitch until I got it somewhere. And so then, like, when I went back to the Times, like, I had this clip from the Washingtonian, and I had these two clips from the Huffington Post, and I worked for Maureen, and then I'd finally get one or two things, and it kind of snowballed.
And I think Stephen can speak more about like pitching story ideas or stories themselves, but one thing I've noticed working on Metro is there's, you know, working as a freelancer but also working as a stringer, making yourself available for any stories at like a city paper like the Inquirer, or if you're in New York City, like any of the tabloids or even Metro will need, and being on call for like any, you know, shootings or breaking news or terrorism attack or like whatever it may be, like a press conference, and introducing yourself to them, and you know, sending them clips, a portfolio, whatever it may be, so you're on their list, and you're on call. And once, they actually call you for a story, and if you do well, they'll call you for another one and another one. And once you're in their radar, that's when, they're more comfortable letting you also pitch story ideas and maybe accepting them. I know that that's a thing in New York City, at least. I would assume the Inquirer might maybe hire stringers.
One of the things to keep in mind is that when you're a freelancer, part of what you're pitching is more about networking than the story. And I think people often want that not to be true. They want to write a subject line with the story idea in it and have the person want to read it. But the best subject line you can send somebody, especially if it's somebody you don't know, is that somebody they know told you to reach out to them. Which may seem counterintuitive, but you gotta trust me, is the way to get people read your emails. If you use the subject line to put a subject, unless the person already knows you and you explain it really perfectly, the chances of them getting it and opening it are very low. At the same time, if you have a professor here who's a nonfiction writer who used to work for the Post, the number of students here who've said Paul Hendrickson told me, you did it too, said Paul Hendrickson suggested I run this story idea by you to an editor at the Post. That's how you get that email opened. And when you start the email, you have to keep in mind that you can't write a lot. So you can't write the lead of a story in the front of an email and convince somebody to read the story because that's too long. You have to be able to very quickly say, I'm just making this up, Paul Hendrickson suggested I'd send you this, this story idea. It's basically about this. Here's 3 sentences about what it is, and here's 1 sentence about why I would be a good person to take a chance on it with. And then they always have to end with I look forward to hearing from you. So every business letter ends with I look forward to hearing from you. No one knows why, but it's just the best thing. If you want to include a link to a clip that feels like something that you did, even if you did it for the DP, if it feels sort of like what you're asking them to do, that will be a good thing. But keep in mind that the way you interact with people when you're trying to freelance with them is more about the process of business letters and interaction than it is about the story ideas, until you really get to know an editor and you can have that shorthand with them where you call them or email them and you're not asking whether they can do the work, but whether it's a good idea. So it's a good idea to be more formal about sending pitch letters, even for the first couple years of your career. To say somebody suggested I do, send this, than to be too familiar, write oblique subject lines, and then not know what to do. Here's the other thing. If somebody doesn't respond to an email, send it to them again with a different subject line.
Interesting. I've never done that.
Don't send this. Just say don't keep sending the same one over and over. You can, sometimes you don't have to adjust it that much, but there is. I think just part of your strategy should be that if I sent this, they didn't pay attention, maybe I need to adjust it a little bit. But the process of freelancing also is to meet the editor. So the editor might say, I love that idea. Somebody here is doing it. What else do you have? So don't rely too heavily on your one brainstorm, right? Because the goal is to have a bunch of little brain showers. And if the person says, I don't like this, but you seem interesting, to have other things to possibly pitch them. Who else has a question?
Do you look at, I was going to ask you, what are you looking for when you?
I field pitches all day, and I think the biggest mistake I see is people pitching me stories that we've just run, literally like that week or that month, and I'm just like, oh, thank you so much, but we actually just did this. Again, what else do you have? But I will say, the subject line, yeah, sure, it's great to have someone but there are, every month I need story ideas, and sometimes I don't have them. And so what I do, at least once a week or a couple times a month, is I literally just search my inbox for travel pitches or food pitches or love pitches. And so my advice would be to search engine optimize your emails. So the search words are in there. If you're pitching a story about a first love or your relationship, I work at Cosmos, so that's what we do a lot. Have those buzzwords in the email. I think that's really helpful.
What the publication calls their coverage of the thing.
Yeah, and also when I worked at Entertainment Weekly, we didn't necessarily have a ton of freelance budget, but we did have really specific columns. We had something called Hot 10 or top of the month or books of my life, these kinds of really niche things that we do. And if someone pitched me a specific person for books of my life, I'd be like, oh, they read the magazine, like they know what we do. And if I'm like looking through my inbox and I'm just like book of my life pitch, like that comes up right away, and I'm like, okay, I'll add this to my doc and like see. And while it is like amazing to follow up all the time, I think that like right now people who work in not necessarily newspapers but like blogs and magazines and websites are just so incredibly overworked and understaffed that like just because you don't hear back doesn't mean that they didn't read it or they're not listening. More often than not, they're just busy. And like we'll get back to you eventually. So it's like amazing to follow up. It's like I have probably like 45 unread emails in my inbox right now that before sitting down. I fully intend to get back to everyone. But it just means that like sometimes I don't respond for a month, which in magazines is fine. Like that doesn't matter.
Right. Keep in mind that if you feel something's an emergency, it's not necessarily an emergency. It's not an emergency because you want to hear back from the editor.
But I do want to know.
Every once in a while, there was a pitch that is an emergency.
Right. Like, the debates were last week, and we have like a couple people that we always call on for debate pitches where it's like, okay, like, hey, do you have anything that's like timely? Where we'll like solicit emails. We'll solicit pitches like the next day, like 10 a.m. We send out like a blast to a bunch of political writers that we work with, and we're like, what's your take? Like, do you want to write anything for us today? And like obviously those are timely, or we expect people to email us like that morning. But like right now, I'm looking for. If you're interested in freelancing, listen up. Like I'm looking for pitches about travel, relationships, like personal finance, career, and like food and entertaining stories for March. Like
that's the other thing. Keep in mind how long ahead.
Yeah.
Understand the architecture of the different publications you're interested in, and understand their times.
Yeah.
Their timeliness, because some things are clearly fast turnarounds, other things are really long turnaround, and you do have to keep in mind those kinds of things. Who else has questions? Yes.
Hi, I was wondering if you guys, like I'm a senior right now, and I was wondering if you recommend kind of switching around at different publications, or if you think it's better to try to like work at a publication you really like right out of college and then stay there and try to grow, or if it's better to get those different like aspects at different newspapers and magazines.
I would say first of all, like I think there used to be a rule that you had to stay somewhere for 2 years and then you can do whatever you wanted. I think that rule does not exist anymore, and I have friends that have bopped around like 8 months here, 10 months there, 2 years there, and that's fine. And I think that it's good to keep that in mind because there are so many places right now that are like somewhat toxic to work. And you kind of have to remind yourself, like,
what are the places that aren't toxic to work?
Cosmo's not toxic. I would say Hearst Magazines, where the company that owns us, we're not a toxic place. But I have worked in like really toxic newsrooms and felt like I can't leave because I need to have 2 years here, and it's not true. If you feel like you're not good, if you're not in a place to grow or to get really great experience, or you don't feel comfortable, like you're allowed to look for other jobs and leave. You don't have to stay for a certain amount of time.
Anybody else have a thought?
I mean, if you can get to the place you want to get to right out of college, that's amazing. That's very rarely the reality. The other thing I would say is just be open to a range of experiences, and you sort of think of like what is most important to you. Do you want to be like a political reporter who covers campaigns? Is what you want to do long form journalism, and you don't care the topic, you just want to be able to write 3,000 to 10,000 words on a subject? You want to be in a certain city because whatever, your family's there, your partner's there, or there's politics there, there's media there, and then there's different ways to get to that, right? So so it's like an interesting question, but if what you've always wanted to do is cover presidential campaign, like the tough question to me would be, let's say you get an internship at the Times, or you get a job to be a researcher at the Times or the Post, which might be a publication you've always wanted to work at. But then somewhere like BuzzFeed or Daily Caller or Huffington Post says like, we'll send you out on a campaign bus and you can be 22 years old and you can be covering a presidential campaign. I guess I would just urge you to like consider things holistically and kind of figure out like, where do you want to be in 2 years, 5 years, and 10 years, and take the thing that gets you closest to that. And it might not be the quote unquote prestigious thing, or it might be, you might say like, I've always wanted to work at the Times. Like I would rather open mail in the New York Times and believe I can claw my way up. And like, that is the most important thing to me. So then like take the internship, job and assume that you will do what he did or do what I did and like convince them to keep you on. But if you've always wanted to cover politics or a presidential campaign and a new website is starting and they have the money to like put you on a bus and put you on a plane and let you run around the country with Elizabeth Warren, well, like, who cares if people have heard of it? Like, have enough confidence in yourself that like you'll do a good job and you'll get noticed. So don't be as maybe like linear as I think I kind of was when I graduated.
Well, you wanted to be at the place you wanted to be, and it wouldn't have taken a writing job at like an alt weekly because you wanted to be at the Times.
Well, I mean, it's a little confusing because I actually always expected to be a magazine writer and wanted to be a magazine writer, but then once I had the option to go to the Times, then I was kind of like, yeah, I think that's more important, because I was choosing between an alt weekly job in Miami at the Miami New Times, which I don't even know if it exists or not.
It does.
And a super low level job at the New York Times, and in that moment I kind of felt like I had the opportunity to work at a place that I didn't think I would ever get to work at until I was like 50, and I want to take it. But again, if the thing that had been more important to me was like writing long form, then like that might have been the wrong choice. I have no complaints with how things worked out for me, but I don't know. I'm just saying there's like different ways to do it.
I agree. The other thing to keep in mind, just by asking the question, you're putting out an idea that sometimes can be a little bit of a dangerous idea early in your career, which is that you're already seeing 3 jobs ahead. And I think that young people often do that, and what they do is they get mad at the first job that they're at because they think they're supposed to move ahead to advance. We see this with J school students all the time and with people coming out from undergrad, and they actually sometimes blow up situations that are good because they haven't worked enough in the world to know what's good and bad. So, I mean, there's an incredible pressure at entry-level jobs. At your first entry-level job, it might seem really personal to you and really specific to the publication you're at, and it's only when you get to the second job that you realize that all places are like that and what you're dealing with is work. I'll give you an example. A lot of people wanted to go to alternative weeklies when there were more of them, and then they found that they had to write 10 cover stories a year, and they had to file on the blog every day. So all they did was complain about how much work they had to do, and some of them quit to freelance, and then they quit. They were upset because they couldn't get enough assignments to keep their time going, and they kind of missed. So there's always either too much work or not enough work.
I think that speaks to like journalism as a whole. Also.
Right. But all I'm saying is that I think it's too easy to have in your head, what is my second job going to be? I think Ashley is right that you should always be aware of what the 3 steps are that are normally how someone gets there. 2 years ago, when Jacob Gardenswartz was getting the Nora Prize, he was very clear he wanted to work on a presidential campaign in 2020. And so he was choosing between a writing job and being a producer for Ari Melber, which is what he is. And he had to be very clear that he thought that was the best chance that he was going to be in the campaign, even though it meant that he wasn't going to write. But he asked enough questions to understand, and given, like, you can ask me this question, when I was coming up, those 3 steps are completely different than the steps would be now. The steps to be Ashley now are completely different than when Ashley came out of college. So you want to do enough research to have that an idea, but when you get a job, do the damn job.
Yeah, and
kill at the damn job.
That's like the top. Yeah,
and don't think about what your next job is going to be. Think that your next job is going to be something that somebody gives you because you killed at that job.
Don't overthink it at the end of the day. Like we're young at this. You know, I think of like 6-month plans. I know you said 2 and 5. I don't want to be like, but like I don't know.
10. I also said 10.
And 10. But at the end of the day, if you're overthinking so much about what the next job is or where you want to go, you know, don't put aside the job that you have now. And the only way you're going to get to that next job is by doing the one you have now. So focus on what's in front of you and day by day.
Other questions? Go ahead, Kate.
Hi. Thanks. Hi, I'm Katie. I'm a senior. I just wondered, like, if you have any advice for standing out, like, in an interview.
Read the publication. There's so many people who come in, and I'm like, what do you like about Cosmo? And they're like, I like the sex stuff. And I'm like, okay, like what stuff? And they're like, the sex stuff. And it's like, it's just so obvious when people like haven't done the research, or like, I always ask people like, who are your favorite writers on staff? Like, what do you like to read? And they just like haven't done it. And like, you're just not going to get a job that way.
If you don't have an answer to what writers are you reading right now, you're in big trouble. So you better find the answer to that question, because it's one that's often asked in these kinds of situations. And I find a lot of Penn students, except for what they've been assigned, they don't have a good answer. So if you're not consuming enough media outside of what you're being given in class, you do need to ask yourself whether you really want to be in the media. If you're not reading a lot of media just because you're obsessed with it, you're not going to become obsessed with it when you get out of school. So you should have answers to those questions, and not only should you know the publication, you should have a couple ideas for the publication. If you're going to actually be face-to-face with somebody, because keep in mind that they can read your resume and find out what's on your resume. And this idea that you're going to, this is a phrase that my co-founder in this always hates, that you're going to pick their mind. He always likes to point out what a horrible visual that is, and how much people hate to be told that you're there to pick their mind. You're there to have a business conversation, and you should have an agenda for it, to talk about what you think you would do if you worked there, ideas you have, and things that you are interested in the publication. Because I got to tell you, I've worked at magazines where they've changed things in the magazine because some smart person came in and said, I think it'd be really cool if you did this. And the person never thought of it, and they get that job, and often they get the job to do that. I mean, it's not to like change the cover and restructure the magazine, but to add an element to the magazine that they don't already have. That can really come from an interview.
And I think that's probably the most important part, but also knowing who's interviewing you. And when they reached out from the Times to interview me, I like 30 minutes before I looked up the guy. His name was Rich Jones, and he happened to have worked at the Philadelphia Inquirer, which is where I was working at, and he used to work in the South Jersey bureau, which is where I was working at. And so like I found out about that like 30 or like right before the interview. And when I got on the phone with him, it we brought that up, and it slowly became an informal conversation rather than an interview, because we established rapport. So like know who's interviewing you, to see what sort of things you have in common, what you can bring up, because I think that also stands out when they've interviewing, they interviewed dozens of candidates, and whoever they had a good conversation with and smart conversation with, and natural one, I'm sure will stand out.
But be careful not to kiss up to them.
No, definitely not.
Wow, that story was so unbelievable.
Yeah,
you have to be really careful. Like, I read the story, I understand the publication, but I'm not desperately impressed that I get to see it. Because in a way, what you're looking for in that situation is for the person to already feel like, this person could be my colleague.
Right.
I don't know if they can do the work yet, but they seem like, somebody we would have here. And in all media organizations, they go on that basic idea. Like, can I see this person working here? Do they make sense? Do they seem like they're, so that's important. Do we have a couple more questions? And then there's lovely food. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Lily. I'm also a senior, and I was just curious, as someone who's on the job hunt for entry-level type jobs, if there are specific things that we should be looking for in job descriptions or be avoiding. I know some people I've talked to in the past have told me to be wary of things like editorial fellowships. So I don't know, just if you have any advice on that.
I think fellowships are great. I think a lot of publications, like, that's kind of the entry-level job right now. At least it is at Cosmo, and it is at HuffPost, where I was actually got my start as a fellow there. But I would be wary of job descriptions that are like, must be trained in SEO and can write 10 stories a day and willing to work nights and weekends and knows how to blog but also report and available to do social media and is free all the time and will do it for free. You see these job listings all the time get like bashed on Twitter, but they still exist. And it's like, if they're asking you to do like a million things that you should get paid for, and they're like not really going to pay you that much, like, don't go work there. It's going to be absolutely terrible.
One thing I would do is, if you can, is talk to the people, and this sort of goes to your question, but like, talk to the people who have had those jobs and find out what have they gone, A, did they like it, right? But B, what have they gone on to do? Or talk to even if you can't talk to the person who just had the job because you don't know, if you're talking to the person hiring, it's like, well, what did the last 3 editorial fellows do? Did they get hired here, or they didn't get hired here, but are they like waiting tables, or did they get hired somewhere else? Are they all in PR? Are they working for, right? Like, that's a pretty good barometer of like the sort of skill set you'll get on the job and where it can lead. And the other thing, and again, I may be saying this like for my generation, it's not relevant to you, but one thing is, like, in this day and age, everyone does everything, right? So like I'm a newspaper reporter, I'm a print reporter, but I'm also expected to like move stuff as quickly as the wires move stuff when the president makes news. I'm expected to write for the web. I'm expected to tweet, I'm expected to blog. I'm expected to be able to go on TV and competently and clearly talk about my stories. I'm expected to land in a city, rent a car, drive somewhere, just do all the things. And same with the TV producers, right? They're expected to produce TV, but they're expected to be able to go on TV in a pinch if something happens to their correspondent. They're expected to write for the web, and they're expected to break news. And everyone needs to be able to do everything. So first of all, you should learn to do everything. Like the idea that you are just a print reporter or just a breaking news person or just a feature writer, like that just doesn't exist anymore, and you're so much more valuable if you can do everything. But secondly, in a way, and again, this may be obvious to you guys, but in a way it like opens up different career paths. Like when I was leaving, I was very much like I'm like a writer, and like that's my skill set, right? And so I just was very focused on like print jobs, and frankly in 2005 I was very focused on like print jobs that weren't online. But the truth is, like, you can be a writer, whether it's for a website, whether it's for a newspaper, whether it's for a magazine. As a TV producer, you can work in radio, and your fundamental job can be writing stories that you then sometimes voice for the radio. So just consider a whole range of options, because there's a million different ways and platforms to do the exact thing you want to do, even though it might not be super intuitive.
Although one thing I will say that we've seen over the years is that there's been the expectation, I think some people had, that you had to be able to write and take pictures and take video. And I'm not sure that actually turned out to be true.
No, not at all.
But 5 years ago and 10 years ago at J schools, people were being told that. So I agree with Ashley. You have to be able to do everything that involves words and reporting. But the idea is that you have to be multi-tasking in terms of taking your own pictures and taking your own video. That is actually less true than people thought it was going to be. And I think that that's a good thing. Yeah. Except there's a disconnect, because I know at J schools people are still being taught that. Because that is the model. The other thing I will say is that don't let job listings dominate your life. Because in reality, most job listings are posted for jobs that are already filled, or they have to be posted for political reasons or union reasons. Yeah. And in reality, if you are interested in a place or multiple places, you should be doing your own research to find out what's going on there and what kind of entry-level jobs are there. I mean, do not wait for something to be listed, because that's the day that everybody else knows about it. In reality, it's not that hard to go through Penn networks, through mentorship networks, to find out what places have assistant job openings, what places have entry-level job openings, what places have their fellowship jobs opening. So I do think that at all levels, both undergrads and grad students do this. They're way too focused on what got listed. In fact, journalism is a pretty small world, especially geographically, because if you can only work in Washington, only work in Philly, only work in New York, it's finite. And you can figure out what is available in the places that you think you're interested in, and you should be doing that work too, and not just waiting for something to come up and being listed. We'll take one more question if there is one. Go ahead in the front. And we'll be here chatting over the lovely food in the next room afterwards, so you can still ask some questions to our panelists. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Valerie, and I'm a freshman. So earlier you mentioned something about toxic newsrooms and how they should best be avoided.
That was her.
Yeah, and then to leave the job. Proudly. So how would you characterize a toxic newsroom versus a good one where it helps you grow?
Yeah, I think like kind of tying into what I said about like being wary of job listings that ask you to do like 1 million things that you know as like a 21-year-old you shouldn't be doing. The toxic newsrooms that I see in New York that my friends are in or I have been in, I think
which ones were you in?
That's not for public knowledge. I think they're the ones where they do expect you to do tons of work that you know is way above your pay grade and that you're not capable of, and there's no support for you to do that. So what I mean is like, okay, like let's say you're working for a political website and they're like, they pull up Ashley's story and they're like, go get me this story. And you're like, well, I'm not sourced up. You're paying me like $10 an hour. Like, how am I supposed to do that? And I think that there is kind of like this battle between doing everything that you're asked, but also like not getting taken advantage of. And I think that a lot of newsrooms in New York are actually like pulling away from that. They're unionizing right now, which is so amazing, and there are so many newsrooms that have much better labor laws. But there are still some that like really want to exploit you and the work that you're doing. And I see this a lot at like digital first publications that are really still focused on like aggregation and syndicating instead of original reporting. But I think it's also like really easy when you're young to kind of like get in this mob mentality of like everything sucks and like our bosses are terrible and we're working, 14 hours a day with no overtime and the snacks suck and like there's no air conditioning. And it's just like these are realities that like shouldn't exist. And if you find yourself in a situation like that, it's okay to be like, this isn't tenable. Like I really want to be a journalist, but like maybe this isn't like the right way to do it. And I think that like the publications that we're talking about up here, I think are like really respectable and like kind of like the gold standard of like where one might want to work, like the Times, the Post, but like that's the tippy top, and there are so many jobs like at the bottom that are
or in the middle
or like the upper middle that are they seem amazing, and then once you get there you're like, wow, this is just like not what I thought it was gonna be. And it's okay to be like, yeah, I want to get out of here, I think, and to like recognize that. That being said, like journalism is a wonderful industry, like the media has so many like amazing parts to it, but like I just don't want to like really sugarcoat it and pretend like everything is like incredible and ambitious and like fruitful when it's there are some like dark places that you shouldn't go.
It should feel, and again, this like balances against my like it's hard work and you should say yes to everything, and especially when you graduate there's nothing that you're below or above rather, but like at the end of the day like it should be fun.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that to be that like there's not times when you're incredibly stressed out or when like you cannot believe that you're expected to drive like 17 hours across Iowa following Jeb Bush, right? Like that is all like a really reasonable part of a job. But like it should feel like fun, and it should feel like exhilarating, and you should feel like even if in the moment you're tired or you're stressed or there's a lot of pressure, like you should feel like lucky to be there and doing it. So like again, I don't think you would have described like being in Puerto Rico after a hurricane struck as fun, right? And I'm sure there were like logistical challenges and you were exhausted and there was pressure and you're fun, right? But like it still feels like exciting and
satisfying at the end of the day.
Satisfying, yeah.
If we're going to sleep, you publish a story and you feel satisfied you did something good.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so like when I feel like when there are more days than not that are not fun, not satisfying, not exhilarating, not fulfilling for whatever reason, then it's time to start thinking about a change.
Yeah.
And that's going to happen less at established places, I think. At any given time in the media, there are always startups. And it's not just new now that there's online, there's always startups. And some of those startups understand the rules of what nonfiction reporting is, and some of them just don't. And that wasn't invented by the online world. We had it in print when I was coming up too. And I still sometimes see people go to places that are clearly just not ever going to be credible. But they want them to be credible because in theory, if it all worked, they would be getting stock options at 21 and all this kind of stuff. But you got to keep in mind that there's a reason why these traditional media outlets and even the non-traditional ones that have succeeded, they have a shared idea of what nonfiction reporting is. And a lot of places want to live on the edge of being just publicity places, brands that are associated with a certain thing that will have certain advertising towards that. And those are the places that I think sometimes young people, I mean, if you're overworked at the Times, tough. You'll be happy that you did it. If you're overworked at a place that turns out that one, it closes in a year, or two, it turns out to really not be a journalistic organization, the person just was talking about it as if they thought it would turn into one. And that happens. And those people recruit at Ivy League schools because they are going to see that you can do some of the work. So I think that's actually scarier than working too hard. And I agree with these guys. I mean, the goal, when it's all said and done, when you finish something hard, is that it was worth doing, people read it and looked at it, and that you're part of a tradition that has existed for a long time, that no matter how few people are in it now and how bedraggled the media outlets are, it's powerful, it's honorable, and it uses every part of your brain. And it is astonishing how one person's piece of writing can make a difference. In a small world, in a big world, and that's the part of it that I am constantly astonished by. And I think you have to have that sense of wonder because every piece of writing you do doesn't do that. But as long as some of them can, that's what makes this a fascinating field to be in. We're going to stop and move into the next room.
One last thing.
Go ahead, Luis.
They gave me permission to come here, but I had to give the Times Up plug. So the year-long fellowship, they start accepting applications October, I think I was told. I think they accept 23 people. This is company-wide fellowship, not just newsroom, business side as well, I believe. You can find all the information online, but they start accepting applications in October, and they accept 23 students out of more people that apply.
24 at least.
22 are for Penn students? No.
So whether you're a senior trying to apply for that job afterwards, or you're any classman looking for summer jobs, you should be looking already. And this night is the beginning of the Nora Prize process begins. So if you're a senior and you're interested in applying on the Nora Prize, please go online at CPCW plus noraprize.com. Look at the application. Think about applying. The deadline is right after Martin Luther King's birthday. That's when all the deadlines are for nonfiction prizes here at Penn. And but take seriously the fact that all the different places you might want to work with, there's no standard way of doing it, so you really have to look, sometimes harder than you think, to find out where you apply and when you apply to them. And if you haven't taken nonfiction writing courses at Penn and you think that you would like to be in nonfiction, it's never too late. I've seen people take one last class before they go and have life-changing things. So don't think that because you are coming to it late that you can't do it. That's also why some people go to journalism school if they come to it late. But if you really have a passion for it and you haven't done it yet, don't spend another minute kicking yourself that you didn't do it. Writing one story for a class, one story for a freelance thing can change your idea of whether you can do this work. And it would change our ideas as editors of whether you can do this work. So just do stories.
Should just give the Flegenheimer a pretty grim piece of journalism.
Oh.
I like it though.
Okay.
I like it too.
Go ahead.
Matt Flegenheimer, who's a reporter at the Times, is he on the congressional beat?
No, he's
Like
politics.
magazine-y kind of.
Yeah, he's doing politics,
He's doing
but longer
those big
pieces.
enterprise
He's a
profiles.
star. He's
Yeah.
amazing. Google him if you haven't heard of him. He's like just one of the best writers. But he won this prize the year before I did, and his major piece of advice is, if you can see yourself doing anything else, do it. But if you can't, then this is the field for you.
Perfect way to end. Thank you very much for coming out. Thank you so much to you guys for coming and being wonderful and funny as always. And there's terrific food for you. And good luck applying to the Nora Prize and find other jobs. And use the alumni network, please.
Yeah.